The first time I met Sergeant Zara Malik, she was eating a peanut butter cracker with the same focused intensity a surgeon brings to open heart work. Not talking, not laughing at whatever Corporal Dennings was hollering about 3 cots down. Just sitting at the edge of her bunk in FOB cost, one leg folded under her, MRE cracker halfway to her mouth, eyes reading the topographic map spread across her knees like it owed her money. I remember thinking, who the hell is this woman? Then Dennings noticed her too, and everything went sideways. It was October. Eastern Afghanistan had started doing that thing it does in October, where the days cook you alive and the nights try to finish the job through frostbite instead. We'd been running patrol routes out of cost for 11 days, and we were all raw from it. Raw tired, raw edge, the kind of worn down that makes men mean. Our unit, 2nd Battalion, 3rd Infantry, had been told we were getting an augmentation. A sniper specialist pulled from another FOB to help cover an upcoming operation near the Tanny district. Nobody asked our opinion on it. The Army rarely does. What nobody told us was that the sniper was a she. Not that it should have mattered. It did, though. I'll be honest about that, because there's no point in telling this story if I'm going to sand down the parts that make us look bad. We were tired men in a cold place, and we didn't want to adjust to anything new, and a woman showing up to our corner of hell with a sniper rifle, and no conversation felt very, very new. Dennings was the loudest about it. Dennings was always the loudest about everything. You lost, sweetheart, he called down the row of cots. She didn't look up from the map. Turned the cracker slowly, bit the corner off. Your sector map is wrong, she said. Not to him, to the map, or maybe to the air between them. The ridge elevation on Grid 472 is marked at 2,200 meters. It's 2,350. Whoever surveyed that was either lazy or dead. Silence. Dennings looked at Martinez. Martinez looked at me. I looked at my boots. How do you know that? Dennings finally said. She folded the map. Precisely the way you fold something you'll need to unfold in the dark. Because I've laid on that ridge for 14 hours, she said, and 14 hours gives you a very specific opinion about elevation. She stood, tucked the map into her plate carrier, and walked to the supply cage to check in her gear. Nobody laughed right then, but the next morning they did. Here's what nobody tells you about forward operating bases. They have their own social architecture, brutal and stupid as a high school cafeteria, just with better weapons and worse food. There are hierarchies. There are tables. There are people who belong and people who are immediately, wordlessly assigned to the margins. Zara Malik was assigned to the margins before she set down her rucksack. Part of it was gender. I won't pretend otherwise. Part of it was that she didn't perform camaraderie. She didn't laugh at the right moments, didn't trade complaints about command, didn't bond over shared misery the way we all did. She was quiet in a way that read is cold instead of careful. She kept to herself during chow. Ran PT alone at 0445 every morning before formation, a lone figure doing hill sprints on the far side of the base perimeter while the rest of us were still arguing with our alarm watches. The map thing got around. FOBs are terrible for secrets. So did other things. That she'd been at FOB Shank. That she'd been at FOB Sharana before that. That she'd been in country for going on 3 years across 2 deployments with barely a break between them. That she'd put in for every hardship assignment available and taken every one granted. Dennings had a theory about this. He shared it loudly over breakfast on day 2. Girls got something to prove, he said, scraping powdered eggs into a shape that would never convince anyone it was food. You see the type. Overcompensating. Probably couldn't hack it in a regular unit, so her qualification score was 98, said Private First Class Osei from the far end of the table. The hell you know that? I asked the supplies sergeant, who asked his counterpart at Sharana. Osei shrugged. He was 20 years old from Accra by way of Columbus, Ohio, and he had the particular superpower of the young and unimpressed. He simply did not assign weight to things that didn't deserve it. 98 out of 100. Best in her class. Apparently, she dropped the other 2 points on purpose to see if anyone would ask why. Dennings looked at his eggs. That's a story, he said. Probably, Osei agreed. I watched Sergeant Malik across the chow hall, eating alone with another map open next to her tray. She wasn't ignoring us. She just didn't need us. There's a specific variety of loneliness that comes from watching someone be complete without you in the room. I recognized it because I'd seen it once before in my grandfather who'd come home from a different war in a different decade and never quite figured out how to want things from people again. It sat wrong in my chest, that recognition. I didn't examine it right away. You learn, in the field, to table the things that sit wrong until you have the bandwidth to turn them over. If you examined everything that sat wrong in a combat deployment, you'd never look at anything else. So I tabled it, ate my eggs, listened to Denning's theory about Sergeant Malik's psychology. 3 days later, the mission brief changed everything. Lieutenant Hargrove had the kind of face that was perpetually apologizing for the news it was about to deliver. Square jaw, sorry eyes. He'd been a decent LT in my experience. Not brilliant, not reckless. The kind of competent and careful that keeps people alive without covering anyone in glory. He laid the operation out on the folding table in the TOC with a map weighted down at the corners by water bottles and a spare radio. Tanny District. Valley approach through a 3-kilometer corridor. High ground on both sides. The East Ridge heavily favored by enemy observers who've been using it to call an indirect fire on the local A&P checkpoint for 2 weeks running. Our job: clear the corridor, neutralize the observation post on the East Ridge, establish a security perimeter long enough for the engineering team to reinforce the checkpoint structure. Standard, except for the East Ridge. East Ridge is the problem, Hargrove said, and I noticed he didn't look at Sergeant Malik when he said it, which meant he was very aware of her. Steep approach, exposed for the last 400 meters. Anyone moving up that slope is a target for whatever's watching the valley. We need Overwatch neutralized before the main element moves. Ow, Martinez said. Hargrove finally looked at Malik. She was already looking at the map. Sergeant Malik will take a position on the West Ridge before first light, he said. She'll have eyes on the OP from there. When the OP is active and the main element is in position, she engages. Distance, Malik said. Hargrove checked his notes. Approximately 900 meters. Wind data from this morning puts, I'll get my own wind data, she said. Not rudely, just factually. The way a carpenter says, I'll bring my own level. Hargrove nodded. He was the kind of LT who knew which battles to decline. After the brief, outside the TOC, Dennings pulled me aside. His voice was low, but his eyes were doing the thing they did when he wanted to perform skepticism for an audience. 900 meters, he said. Moving target, wind, first light. That's not a shot. That's a lottery ticket. She's got a 98 qualification score, I said. On a range, man. A range. Not a ridgeline in the dark with an enemy OP that will absolutely hear her if she misses, and then she won't miss, said Osei, appearing from nowhere the way he always did, carrying 2 canteens and an expression of absolute serenity. Dennings stared at him. How do you know? Osei handed him a canteen. Because she's been awake since 0300 running the math on it, he said. I know because I couldn't sleep, and I saw her light on. She had her ballistics notebook, her wind tables, and what looked like a protractor. He paused. Also, she had a second map, different than the one from yesterday. She got a second map? She drew it herself, Osei said simply, and walked away. I watched Dennings process this. Watched the skepticism do something complicated in his face. Not quite soften, not quite crack, just shift into a shape that had a little more room in it. He didn't say anything else about the lottery ticket. The night before the operation, I couldn't sleep either. I lay on my cot listening to the particular silence of an FOB at 0200, generators humming, distant dogs, the low radio crackle from the TOC, the sound of wind coming down off the mountains like it had somewhere to be. My body was tired in every layer, but my brain had decided tonight was the night to think about everything it had been avoiding. My wife's last email. The check engine light on the truck I'd left in my driveway in Clarksville. My mother's voice on the phone 2 weeks ago, carefully not crying. And Sergeant Malik. I got up, walked out to the perimeter. The cold was serious, not hypothermic, but the kind that gets into your collar and reminds you it could get worse if it wanted to. She was there. Of course she was. Sitting on an ammo crate near the north wire, her rifle across her knees, the hand-drawn map weighted with a stone, a red-lensed flashlight in her teeth, working numbers into the margin with a grease pencil. I walked over, sat on the adjacent crate. Didn't say anything for a while. She didn't say anything either. The pencil scratched. The wind came down off the mountains. What are you calculating? I said eventually. She didn't look up. Everything, she said. Another long quiet. The flashlight moved to a new column of numbers. You've done this before, I said. Not a question. She glanced up then, just for a moment. Her eyes were dark and direct and held the specific quality of someone who has been looked at with doubt enough times that they've stopped factoring it into their calculations. Yes, she said. How many times? She looked back at the map, wrote something, erased it, wrote again differently. Enough, she said, that the number stopped meaning what people think it means when they ask. I sat with that. The generators hummed. The dog barked once and went quiet. They're going to be wrong about you tomorrow, I said. She turned the map 90 degrees. Check something against the protractor. They're wrong about me every day, she said. It doesn't change the math. I went back to my cot. I didn't sleep, but I stopped worrying about the mission. Some things you just know when you sit close enough to them. We moved out at 0330. The valley approach in the dark is a specific kind of miserable that doesn't translate well into language. I'll try anyway. Cold ground, hard and broken, the kind of terrain that finds every weakness in your boots and exploits it. The sky black in the way that Afghan mountain sky gets black. Not city dark, not suburban dark, but the original dark, the dark that existed before electricity was invented to argue with it. Stars so sharp they felt aggressive. Your breath coming out in small pale flags. The main element, 12 of us, Hargrove at the front, Martinez running the radio, Dennings on the M249, moved toward the valley corridor. Sergeant Malik went left. Alone. She'd politely declined a spotter. Hargrove had offered PFC Osei, who'd volunteered, and Malik had looked at him with something that wasn't unkindness and said, the West Ridge approach is single file at night. 2 people are twice the noise and half the advantage. I'll be fine. She'd paused. I'm always fine. Osei had accepted this with the same serene gravity with which he accepted everything, and fallen in with the main element. So she went left, into the dark. The mountains swallowed her like she was expected. The walk to the valley corridor took 40 minutes. I was running rear security, which means I was watching our back trail, which means I had too much time alone with my thoughts, and not enough to do with my hands. The cold was working its way through my gloves. I flexed my fingers every few minutes to keep the blood moving. 40 minutes of walking in the dark, and the whole time I was thinking about the West Ridge. 900 meters. Moving targets, first light, wind coming down the throat of the valley. The kind of shot that, if it misses, turns a manageable situation into a catastrophe. The main element exposed in the corridor, the OP still active, enemy observers calling in positions. I stopped thinking about it. Looked at the stars instead. Found the ones I knew. We held at the valley mouth and waited. Radio check. Hargrove's voice was controlled and flat in my earpiece. Martinez fed coordinates. The engineering team was 90 minutes out, waiting for our green light. Dennings crouched next to me behind a rock formation. I could see him running the numbers in his head the same way I was. His jaw was tight. She's up there, he said, barely a whisper. She's up there, I confirmed. What if don't? He didn't. We watched the East Ridge through NVGs, green-washed and grainy, looking for the OP. There, a flicker of movement at the crest, irregular, human. They were awake. They were watching. They've been watching this valley every morning for 2 weeks. Not this morning. They just didn't know that yet. At 0513, 13 minutes before first light, Sergeant Malik's voice came over the command net. Calm. The way you're calm when you've made every possible decision in advance, and all that's left is execution. West Ridge. I have eyes on. 2 personnel, OP position, grid. She read the coordinates. Hargrove confirmed. Wind is 8 knots. Northeast, variable. I'm accounting for the gust cycle. Every 40 seconds, it drops to 6. A pause, so short it barely existed. Request authorization to engage on your mark. Hargrove looked at Martinez. Martinez gave him the all-clear signal from the engineering team. Sergeant Malik, Hargrove said, "You are authorized. Engage at will." Silence on the net. I pressed my back against the rock, looked at the east ridge, thought about 900 meters of cold mountain air and a woman with a protractor who'd been awake since 0300. Dennings was holding his breath. I could tell by the stillness of him. The shot, when it came, arrived in our ears as a flat crack, compressed by distance, flattened by the valley walls into something that sounded almost minor, almost incidental, like a period at the end of a sentence. On the east ridge, through my NVGs, one figure dropped. The second figure moved, scrambled, tried to get behind cover. The second shot came 8 seconds later. 8 seconds. I know because I counted. The second figure dropped. Silence. Then, Hargrove's voice, steady and professional, confirmed. Good effect on target. Main element, move up. And we moved. The rest of the operation is a different story. The kind of story every infantry unit has: controlled movement, a secondary contact in the middle section of the corridor that nobody had expected and everyone had mentally prepared for anyway. The specific 5-second eternity of a firefight where your training runs your body while your brain watches from somewhere slightly above and to the left of itself. Martinez took a ricochet fragment to the forearm. Not bad. Bloody, painful enough for a Purple Heart, and a story for his kids. We cleared the corridor. The engineering team came up. The checkpoint got its reinforcement. Nobody talked about the East Ridge until we were back at the FOB. Then, everybody talked about it. Malik came in 40 minutes after the main element. She had to cover more ground, steeper terrain, alone. She walked through the FOB gate with her rifle across her back and her hand-drawn map still folded in her plate carrier. And she went directly to the supply cage to log her weapon, and then she went directly to the chow hall. I watched Dennings watch her walk by. He had a specific look on his face that I'd never seen on him before. It took me a minute to name it. When I did, it surprised me. Shame. Not the performative embarrassment of a man caught doing something minor. The real thing. The deep variety that rearranges a face from the inside. He stood up from his cot and walked to the chow hall. I followed, because some instincts are just curiosity in uniform. Malik was eating. Same corner, same posture, different Amari. She didn't look up when Dennings sat down across from her. He was quiet for a full 30 seconds, which, for Dennings, was the equivalent of a speech. 8 seconds, he finally said. She looked up. Between the first and second shot, he said. I counted. 8 seconds. She looked at him for a moment. Something was happening in her face that wasn't quite readable from where I was standing. Too many things at once, compressed under a surface that had learned very well how to stay still. The gust cycle, she said finally, it drops every 40 seconds. I didn't want to wait another 32. Dennings nodded. He looked at the table. I said things, he said. I know what you said. Yeah. He turned his fork over in his hand. Don't, she said. Not harshly. Just finally, like she'd heard apologies before and had decided they occupied the wrong space in her day. Just be different tomorrow. He looked at her. That's the apology that means something, she said, and went back to her food. Dennings sat there for another minute. Then he nodded again, very slowly, picked up his tray, and went to sit next to Osei instead of alone. I sat down at the far end of Malik's table. She glanced up, glanced back down. Good work today, I said. Yes, she said simply. We ate in a quiet that had a completely different texture than the silence from before. Before had been her solitude and our exclusion of it. This was just two people eating with no performance required from either of them. It was, I remember thinking, the best meal I'd had in 11 days. She told me about the 100, eventually. Not all at once. Not as a confession or a boast. The way you tell someone about something that has become so much a part of your interior architecture that sharing it feels less like disclosure and more like pointing out a load-bearing wall. This is here. It holds things up. Don't lean on it. It was 2 weeks after the Tanny operation. We were both on base, down days, the particular limbo of a deployment that's between missions and cycling too fast through itself. Hargrove had given the unit a half day, and most of the men had gone horizontal within 30 minutes. I found Malik at the North Wire again. Same ammo crate. No map this time, which felt significant. The way absence of a tool signals that the work is done for now, that the person is just a person at the moment and not a function. She had tea, actual tea, in a beat-up tin cup, steam rising off it in the cold. I'd never seen her with tea before. "Where'd you get that?" I said. "The A&P sergeant at the checkpoint," she said. He gave me a box. A pause. He said thank you. I sat down. She offered the cup. I took a sip. Very strong, very sweet, the kind of tea that means something in the culture it comes from and tastes like someone decided it. I handed it back. "He knew," I said. "He knew. News travels in a valley. Faster than we think, always. The local people have their own radios, their own networks, their own methods of understanding what changes in their landscape and why." Two men who'd been making their checkpoint a daily nightmare were simply gone one morning, and then the infantry came, and the engineers came, and the checkpoint got stronger, and the A&P sergeant had done his own math. He'd found her at the supply cage 2 days later with a box of tea and a very formal bow. "What did you say to him?" I asked. "I said thank you," she said. And then we stood there for a minute, not being able to talk to each other, because neither of us speaks the other's language, and that was fine. It was enough just to stand there. She took the cup back, held it in both hands. "The 100, I said, because I've been working up to it, and there was no graceful approach anyway. She was quiet for a moment. Not surprised, just locating the right door into it. "Who told you?" "Supplies sergeant." "Who heard it from the FOB Sharana counterpart?" "Who apparently heard it from everyone hears it eventually," she said. "It travels the same way everything travels." "Is it true?" She looked at the mountains. The light was going gold at the edges, that specific late afternoon gold that makes even difficult country beautiful for about 20 minutes before the cold takes over. "Confirmed engagements, both deployments combined," she said slowly, as if she were reading from a document inside herself. 107. A pause. "That's the number in the log. That's the number that exists on paper." I waited. "People ask that number like it's a score," she said. "Like I should feel something specific about it. Proud or terrible. Like those are the two options." She turned the cup in her hands. "The truth is I don't feel either of those things, and I haven't figured out yet if that's a problem or just what happens." The wind came down off the mountains. Cold, purposeful. "When did you stop feeling it?" I asked. She considered this with the same precision she applied to everything else, taking the question apart to look at its actual shape. "I didn't stop feeling it," she said finally. "I just stopped feeling it in real time." It's like she paused, finding the right analogy, discarding 2 or 3 I didn't hear. You know how a building engineer can look at a structure and understand where the stress points are? All of it at once, in a single look. They're not feeling each individual bolt. They see the whole. She looked at me. "I see the whole. I just don't feel each bolt anymore." "Is that what you wanted?" I said. "When you started?" A long silence. Long enough that I thought she wasn't going to answer. "What I wanted," she said, "was to be good enough that my being here wasn't a question anyone felt entitled to ask." Her voice didn't change. That was the thing about Malik. She could say devastating things in the tone of a weather report. Before the first deployment, I had a CEO who told me to my face that I was going to get someone killed by being here. Not because of anything I'd done, just because of what I was. She turned the cup once more. So I became someone whose presence was a fact. Not a debate. A fact. She paused. The 100 is part of what makes it a fact. I sat with that. The gold was leaving the mountain edges. The cold was taking over as promised. "Did it work?" I said. She almost smiled. Almost. The corners of her mouth did something brief and complicated that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite pain. "Denning sat next to Osei," she said. "So, partially. What I didn't know, sitting at the North Wire with the tea and the fading gold light, was that 2 days later we'd get the mission brief for the Shambles sector operation. What nobody knew was that the Shambles sector operation would be the one that made the number mean something different. Not larger. Different. The Shambles brief was long, and the intelligence was bad in the way that field intelligence is often bad. Not wrong, exactly, just thin. The enemy element in the sector was using a series of compounds in the village periphery to stage weapons, move personnel, and run an IED manufacturing operation that had killed 2 Marines from a unit operating to our south and injured 6 more. Our job was to clear and hold 3 compounds, sequential, with overwatch coverage from the high ground on the northeast corner of the village. High ground overwatch. By now, everyone in the unit knew what that meant. Malik studied the target package for 4 hours. I know because I walked past the planning space twice, and she was in the same chair, same position, different pages. She came to Hargrove that evening. The northeast high ground is compromised, she said. Hargrove looked up from his planning notes. Compromised how? The approach is observed. There's a secondary position. A building with a collapsed section on the southeast edge gives partial elevation advantage and better concealment. She put her hand-drawn map on his table. She'd already been out and back from a reconnaissance walk that nobody had authorized and nobody had stopped. The angle is harder from the southeast. I'll need to account for the building interference on the left edge of my field of fire. Hargrove looked at the map, looked at her. He was the kind of LT who'd learned, in the past 2 weeks, to take her self-assessments as operational data rather than personal confidence. What's your confidence level? He said. High enough to tell you the Northeast is worse, she said. He approved the modified plan. Dennings came to me that night. He looked less skeptical and more unsettled, which was a different kind of face on him. More honest, less defended. She changed the whole plan, he said. Just walked in with a hand-drawn map and changed the whole plan. I know. And Hargrove he trusts her math, I said. You do too now. You just don't want to say it out loud yet. Dennings looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, her math is good, in the careful tone of a man putting something fragile down on a shelf. Yeah, I said. I was wrong, he said, even more carefully. Yeah, I said. He nodded, went back to his cot, started cleaning his weapon with the focused attention of a man who has decided to be better at something and is practicing on the nearest available object. The night before Shamble, I wrote a letter home. I do this before every significant operation. Not because I think it'll be my last letter, but because the discipline of writing one forces me to be honest about what I value, and honesty about what you value is its own kind of armor. I wrote about my wife, the truck's check engine light, my mother. I wrote about Malik, not her shooting, not the math, not the number, about the tin cup of tea and the A&P sergeant who couldn't speak her language and bowed anyway, and the way she'd said it was enough just to stand there, about what it costs a person to have to become a fact, about Osei, who had decided from day one that she was already a fact and spent the rest of his energy on more interesting questions. I sealed the letter and put it in my kit and went to sleep. 3 hours later, my alarm went off. We had a mission. Shamble was a Tuesday. I know because I remember thinking during the movement in that dying on a Tuesday felt administratively inconvenient, the kind of thought that shows up when you're scared and your brain has decided to be useful in the wrong direction. It was colder than the Tanny operation, the kind of cold that sits in your throat and makes breathing feel effortful, like you're pulling air through something it doesn't want to come through. The village was 3 kilometers in. We moved in a staggered column, no lights, no noise beyond what boots on broken ground make no matter what you do, a low, rhythmic crush that sounds enormous in your own ears, and probably carries no further than 40 meters, but your ears are not interested in probably. Malik split off at the first bend in the approach road. She took the southeast route, alone again. Her rifle was her particular rifle, a bolt-action .338 Lapua she'd been carrying so long it appeared to be part of her structural anatomy. The way a craftsman's tool eventually stops looking like a separate object and starts looking like an extension. She moved into the dark and was immediately nothing. Not even a sound. I have no idea how she moved that quietly, and I have made peace with not knowing. We continued to the first compound. The first compound was a sweep. Clean or abandoned, which amounts to the same thing tactically and to a very different thing humanly if you let yourself think about it. Empty rooms with the warm cold of recently occupied space. blankets still pressed into the shape of sleeping bodies. A tea glass tipped on its side, but not broken. People had been here hours ago. We're not here now. Someone had warned them, or they'd heard us coming, or they'd left for an unrelated reason that had nothing to do with us. The calculus of village movement in a combat zone is something I've never fully understood and have stopped trying to. Second compound, 300 meters northeast. This one was not clean. I won't describe it in detail because the specifics aren't the point and the specifics belong to the men who were there, not to paper. What I'll say is this. A secondary element that the intelligence hadn't accounted for, staged in the alley between the second and third compounds, made contact with our lead element at close range. Very close. The kind of close that collapses everything into a corridor of noise and movement and the specific tunnel vision that combat produces. Your world reduces to the 5 meters in front of you, and the training your body has memorized takes over, and you stop being a thinking person and become a trained reflex in boots. Martinez was at the radio. Hargrove was calling it in and managing sectors simultaneously with the particular split attention that good leadership requires and looks from the outside like a man having two conversations with himself. Dennings was on the M249, and it was singing. There's no other word for it. That weapon in his hands was an argument he was winning. I was covering the south approach. My world was a wall and a doorway and whatever came through the doorway. Nothing came through my doorway. What happened was on the north side of the compound. I heard it before I understood it. A change in the volume of fire from the alley. A reduction that didn't mean we were winning. It meant something else had changed. A position somewhere above. A new angle. The secondary element, having been comfortable in the alley, suddenly exposed to something they couldn't see from where they were standing. Malik. She'd moved. The southeast position she'd briefed with Hargrove was her anchor, but she'd assessed the situation as it developed, and she'd moved to a third position, one that nobody had mapped, that gave her the angle into the alley. I found out later she'd moved across 160 meters of open ground in the middle of an active firefight, using the moment when the secondary element's attention was entirely on our position in the compound. 60 seconds, maybe less, from one piece of cover to another. Low, fast, silent. 160 meters of open ground. In a firefight, the secondary element in the alley took fire from an angle they couldn't return. In a matter of seconds, the math of the situation changed completely. When things went quiet enough to breathe, Hargrove got on the radio. Sergeant Malik, status. A pause. The pause of a person who has just done something that took everything and is now reassembling. In position, she said. South alley is clear. I have eyes on the third compound approach. Understood. Hold position. Holding. Her voice was the same as it had been at the FOB. The same as it had been reading the grid coordinates in Tanny. Calm the way still water is calm. Not because nothing is happening beneath it, but because the surface has decided independently to hold. We cleared the third compound without contact. The IED material was there, a significant find, the kind that makes intelligence officers very interested and everybody else very angry on behalf of the dead it would have made. The engineers documented and removed. Hargrove coordinated the exfil. Coming out of the compound with my sector covered, I passed the south alley. I looked down it. I don't know what I expected to see. Evidence. Wait. Some visible record of what had happened there. It was an alley. Broken walls, dirt, the ordinary wreckage that combat leaves behind. Not marked with anything that remembered what it had taken or given. These places never are. That's one of the things that takes the longest to make peace with. We were back at the FOB by 1400. After debrief, after weapons cleared and logged, after Martinez's arm got redressed, and he complained about it with the aggressive joviality of a man who is very grateful to be able to complain about anything. After all of that, I found Malik at the North Wire. Of course I did. She was looking at the mountains. No map, no notebook, no tea this time. Just standing with her rifle slung and her hands in her pockets, and her face doing the thing where it was entirely still, and I had learned by now that the stillness was not absence, but density, everything present and held. I stood next to her. The mountains were catching the late afternoon light, that gold again, brief and honest. You moved, I said. Yes. Nobody mapped that second position. No, the alley opened up when the contact shifted north, she said. The angle was there for maybe 40 seconds. If I was going to use it, I had to move before I'd fully decided to move. She was quiet for a moment. I hate that. When the decision and the action are the same thing, and there's no space between them to think. I looked at her. But you did it. I did it, she said. Flat. Not proud. Just accurate. And the result is what it is, she said. The result is its own thing. I don't own it. I thought about what she'd said at the Wire 2 weeks ago, about the CEO who'd told her she'd get someone killed by being here. I thought about the 100 in the log. I thought about the A&P sergeant with his box of tea and his bow and the sufficient silence between them. What do you own? I said. She turned and looked at me directly. A thing she didn't do often, not because she was evasive, but because she rationed directness the way you ration resources in the field, used where needed, not spent on ceremony. The math, she said. I own the math, the decision, the moment. Everything after that belongs to whatever happens next. The gold light was leaving again, taking its 20 minutes and going. Does that make it easier? I said. Another of her long pauses, the kind that aren't evasion, but honest searching. It makes it possible, she said finally. Easier is a different operation. 3 days later, Sergeant Zura received orders transferring her to a specialized unit operating out of Bugram. The details were above my clearance level. I knew she was going. I knew it was somewhere harder and more specific than where we'd been, and that she'd requested it. She packed in 40 minutes. She traveled light in a way that suggested she'd made peace, long ago, with not accumulating things. Osei shook her hand. He held it for a moment and said something I didn't hear, and she nodded once. Dennings was there. He was standing at the edge of the motor pool with his hands in his pockets, and a face that had given up performing anything. When she walked past him, he said, "Stay sharp, Sergeant." She stopped. She looked at him. "You too, Dennings," she said. And then, "You're better than you were on day one." His mouth did something that might have been the beginning of a smile. "Because you raised the bar," he said. "The bar was always there," she said. "You just started seeing it." She got in the vehicle. I was standing at the gate, and I raised my hand, and she raised hers, not a salute, not a wave, something in between, the gesture that means I see you, and I know, and go well in the language that doesn't have words. The vehicle moved. She was gone the way she'd arrived, completely. No half-presence, no trailing signal. Here, and then not here, and the space where she'd been felt different than it had before she filled it. I've been home for 8 months now. The check engine light on my truck turned out to be an oxygen sensor, $17 and 20 minutes, and the thing that kept me awake at 200 in FOB cost is now a receipt in my glove compartment. My wife made dinner the night I got back. My mother called 3 times. The ordinary life assembled itself around me the way it does, the way it's supposed to, with the texture of normalcy that takes a few weeks to stop feeling like a disguise. I think about Malik sometimes in the way you think about people who showed you something that needed showing. Not often, not with grief, with the clear and complete gratitude of someone who was wrong about a thing and got corrected by someone more capable than him in a place where wrong gets expensive. I think about Dennings standing at the motor pool, trying to find the words for what he owed her, and Malik declining the words in favor of the only currency that actually means anything. Be different tomorrow. I think about the second position, the 40-second window, the decision that had to happen at the same speed as the action, no space between. I think about what she said about the math. I own the math. Everything after that belongs to whatever happens next. 107 confirmed. 108 by Shamble. Maybe more now, wherever she is, whatever specific and necessary work she's doing in places whose names are above my clearance. The men who laughed at her on day one, Dennings, and the others who joined in with their silence when they could have offered something better. They were doing what scared, tired people do when something unfamiliar arrives in their space. I understand it. I participated in the passive way of a man who didn't say anything when he should have. What I know now, 8 months and one debrief, and one truck repair and a lot of ordinary dinners later, the number was never the thing. The thing was that she showed up every single day to a place that had decided in advance she didn't belong, with her hand-drawn maps and her grease pencil and her protractor and her ballistics notebook. And she did the math, and she moved when the window was 40 seconds, and she sat at the North Wire with a cup of A&P tea, and she declined apologies in favor of evidence. The number is what the math left behind. What she actually carried into every room was something harder to log. The willingness to be excellent in a place that had not yet decided to see it. That's not a score. That's not a stat. That's the thing I'm still trying to learn how to carry.